It was once a dream of Ruben Amorim's to leave Lisbon and rebuild Manchester United. But quickly, that dream has turned into a nightmare for Ruben Amorim and the Manchester United fans. And everywhere you look, newspapers, TV, social media, pretty much everyone is saying the same thing. And that Ruben Amorim, it's time to go.
It's time to go!
But what is the real story? Of course, I don't know all the facts, but I'm going to give you my opinion. This is a second sort of episode on a Q&A answering your questions on Ruben Amorim, which I've done in the past. The link in the previous video is down there. And of course, a link to the playlist I've done on Ruben Amorim is in the link description as well. I've done timeline rebuilds, so you can see when he first took over Sporting right until the end. Make sure you check that out below. But I'm done with the cheap plugs. So let's get in to some of the questions that you've asked about Ruben Amorim. But I'm also going to give you my insight. So before I get into the questions, I'm just going to say one thing. Obviously, it's not gone right for Ruben Amorim. There's no doubt about it. There's no sort of sugarcoating it. It's been an awful time for him so far. But we are only 4 games in to the Premier League. And to be fair, they lost to Arsenal and Manchester City. But they did do well, even though they had to scrape a win against Burnley. And I thought they actually played okay against Arsenal as well. So I do think there is a little bit of overreaction. I also do think the key players such as Cunha, who's been, I think, United's best attacker, being injured. And even Mason Mount, when he came back into the team, was very good. But I guess the thing is with Mason Mount, he's always injured, so you can't really count on him. But I think they've actually looked good. But I do think there is a little bit of an overreaction. Of course, there are some definite concerns about Manchester United, especially in big games at this moment, of course, with Arsenal and Man City. And as a recording, they've not played Chelsea yet, and they could either win or lose. But I do think 4 games in, it's a bit of an overreaction. I think once we get to the end of October, then you can start making the claims if Man United haven't improved and haven't improved their standing in the league, then you can make the case. And of course, the match against Grimsby is probably the low light of Ruben Amorim's tenure so far, along with probably losing the Europa League final to Tottenham. But I do think, these things, we do see cup upsets all the time. It's not an excuse. There is no excuse for losing that. They should have done better. But it has only been 4 Premier League games. He can still turn it around. But it's looking bad. I will admit, it's looking bad. And there's someone who, of course, loves Ruben Amorim for what he was able to do for my club. I understand why people are like that. And I'm not here to make any excuses for Ruben Amorim. He has, he's put in the groundwork and hasn't paid off. That happens with managers sometimes. It is what it is. There's no defending on what's happened at a club like Manchester United. It's not good enough. So I've got some questions from you guys which you have left on my videos, not just the last Q&A one, but I've tried to find all the ones sort of since that video 3 months ago and find more questions, and I found a few of them here. If you do want me to keep this regular or you do want to ask more questions, I'm active in the comments, or at least try to be. So if you want me to answer a question, put it in the comments or follow me on Twitter. The link's in the description and on screen. More than happy to answer them. I believe my DMs are open as well. So feel free to ask questions if you need to. The first guy, I'm not going to try and pronounce his name, but because it doesn't really make sense to me, but TA3, I'll call you. Is really Ruben Amorim used to threaten to resign in Sporting? So my friend Kevin did a space on this throughout the week, and you can check that in the link in the description as well. I know I put a lot of stuff in there, but shout out to Kevin. He is a much more knowledgeable man than me, so make sure you follow him. And he described this pretty well. And I would say it's maybe unfair to use the word threaten to resign, but he has spoke publicly in press conferences at Sporting, sort of mentioning his resigning at least. So a lot of the time when Ruben Amorim gave these quotes, it was during the 22-23 season where Sporting had their worst season under Amorim, finishing in 4th, and here's just some of the quotes that he used. Quote, "If the club wants me to, I can leave. I've said it 1,000 times. They don't need to pay anything. I'm confident we'll make a comeback. Others haven't won titles with better conditions." End quote. And another one that same season from December, quote, "If I leave, it's because of the clause, 30 million euros, or I go home because I feel like I want to stop. I like being at Sporting. I feel there are still things for me to improve, and I will fight with all Sporting fans. I'm not as naive as I was 3 years ago." End quote. So yes, he has sort of threatened to leave Sporting, but I guess it depends on the context really, because it also does depend on the tone as well. And I think he wasn't exactly a direct threat, but I think Ruben Amorim is quite smart in saying these things that mean something else. That makes sense. It's almost like a politician, really, where it's like he's saying there isn't a direct threat, but it definitely is more confrontational and on the defensive side. Like, he's making it clear that he won't stand in his way if the club wants him to go, the same as he said at Manchester United, and then saying it like I've said it 1,000 times. He's sort of showing impatience and frustrations. And again, what he said at Sporting, they don't need to pay anything. It sort of almost dares the club to let him go, removing any excuses that he may have. So it's less of a threat, I suppose, and more of a challenge. But I guess you can sort of have those in the same context. But yeah, he has threatened to leave, I suppose, if you want to put it in that context. But I think it's more of a 50-50. It really depends on how you see the comments. For me, I personally see them as threatening to leave. And of course, he ended up leaving anyway. Wants to try and go to West Ham and then to Manchester United. So I don't know. I think it was never like, because I'm not being backed, I want to leave. It is more because he was making mistakes. And he's like, if I make mistakes, then you can get rid of me with zero cost, which I guess fair enough. But yeah, he has almost, I guess, indirectly threatened to leave. The next question is from the same man. He says, is the situation in Manchester United similar to what happened at Sporting? So I think, yeah, when he took over Sporting first and he took over Man United first, I know he only had like the 3 months of Sporting compared to the 6 months or even more at United. But it was sort of using a squad that wasn't his. He had players that he didn't want to use or didn't see a future with. And it was the same at Sporting. And they both had poor seasons. Of course, United was probably worse, finishing, 17th, 16th, compared to Sporting's 4th. But I think there is similarities there. But this season is sort of the new season it would have been for Sporting under Ruben Amorim. And that year, they went unbeaten to win the title. They only lost the last or the penultimate game of the season to Benfica. So, yeah, it's definitely a lot different now. I do think Ruben Amorim is sort of running out of the goodwill that he had last season, because when you look at last season, it was almost like, okay, he didn't have the squad he wants, he didn't have the players he wanted, but now they've made investment. They've brought in Sesko, they've brought in Matheus Cunha, Mbeumo, Dorgu. They've sold the players that he didn't want, and he got the board to get rid of them, whether it was Rashford, Sancho, Antony, the list goes on. And even what he's doing with Mainoo at the moment, I think Mainoo could probably improve this Manchester United team if he's put in. But at the same point, there is still team quality in the team that's lacking. I think their defensive structure is a bit lacking. I do actually like Lenny Yoro, and I don't really know why he insists of bringing him off every time. Luke Shaw, he's 30, and he's never fit. And when he is fit, like against Manchester City, he was the worst player on the pitch, at fault for all 3 goals. And then the goalkeeper situation is bizarre as well, because Onana was there, obviously wasn't good enough. Bayindir, I don't really know that much about him, but he's looked very shaky. Lemons I've never seen play, so I'm not even going to put an opinion on him, but I'm sure their scouts have, so maybe Lemons is the future. But he has been backed a lot more this season. They haven't brought in a whole new team because they just wouldn't be able to. But I think what you look at the situation and Ineos, they have backed him in both buying and selling players for his system. So, yeah, I think the same happened at Sporting with Varandas bringing in like Pedro Gonçalves, Nuno Santos. They bought players for his system and it paid off in the long run. But I do think, like I said at the start of the video, it's been 4 games. They've had a very tough start. Arsenal finished second last year, one of the best teams in Europe, semi-final in the Champions League. Of course, Man City, it's never nice to lose against your rivals, but I think everyone pretty much had Man City beating Manchester United anyway. Maybe not by 3, but I do think United did have a few open goals which they missed, and a few chances that save from Donnarumma and Mbeumo was fantastic. But obviously it wasn't good enough, and I'm not trying to put any positive spin on it. The defensive quality was poor, and so was the midfield. I did actually thought Mbeumo was okay in that game, to be fair. But like I said, does that result change with someone like Cunha and Mason Mount? I don't know. I think they're a lot more maybe clinical with Matheus Cunha, but at the end of the day, it wasn't good enough. So it is similar to sort of turn that answer into such a long one. It is similar to an extent, but we were already seeing better results at Sporting than we are seeing in Manchester United right now. So, yeah, it's similar to an extent, but not in the same way this season. Another question from the guy, he says, what do you think about Ruben Amorim's system? Does he need more quality, or simply it doesn't work in the Premier League? And also, can you see Ruben Amorim turning things around? I'll leave that question till the end of the video, the last one, but I will answer in terms of the system. I think the system works. I just think you need the players to play it. And Manchester United don't have that right now. And this is what I said on Twitter recently, and people sort of misconstrued what I was trying to say about Ruben Amorim. And that was that Ineos hired him knowing he was only going to play that system. if you know Rúben Amorim, he's only going to play that system. And of course, in possession, the formation changes and the tactics change, but he's always going to start with that formation and play that way. That's Rúben Amorim. That's who he's always has been. So when I said on Twitter that it's like hiring a sushi chef to make lasagna, I was sort of trying to say that he's not going to change. And if you wanted a manager who's going to come in and change, that isn't Rúben Amorim. So if Ineos really expected Rúben Amorim to change, they're like, why isn't he changing? It's because you appointed the guy that only has that one system. And people will say, oh, he needs to revert from this system. He needs to go to a 4-3-3. And I've seen some takes of Manchester United that it's like 4-4-3, this team wins the league. 4-4-2, this team wins the league. And it doesn't. You've had similar formations under like Rangnick, Mourinho, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. And to be fair, you've finished second, you've won a few trophies. But it's never been, winning leagues or anything. So I do think that's kind of unfair. I do understand the frustration though, because like I said, he's not got the players for a system. I think, especially at the back three, I really like Lenny Oro. I actually think De Ligt and Martinez are alright, but when you've got guys like Shaw, Dalot, and even to an extent Bruno Fernandes, who has to play so deep in his role, you're turning it a playmaker into such a holding midfielder. It doesn't really suit what Manchester United are. And obviously, I'm not trying to say that Bruno Fernandes is a bad player. He's bad in this system, I think, but that's because he's having to do so much more instead of being a facilitator or a playmaker. So I think that definitely does harm Manchester United. I think what Ineos have done very well, and I'll give them credit, and Rúben Amorim, is the front three, of which I assume they will start playing Sesko, Matheus Cunha and Mbeumo, and maybe another one like a Diallo up there or a winger off the bench. I think that's a very good front three, and I think that is a very strong Premier League front three. And I think they did lack goals last season, so I think it's like, okay, fair enough, you lack goals, so you're getting goal scorers in. Sesko, I'm not convinced, but I do think Mbeumo and Cunha have looked good already. And I think when they play, they look a lot better when they play together. So I think definitely they've done well there. But I just think the defence and the midfield lack something. I don't think Casemiro has done all that bad under Amorim. But I do think they could probably do something better in that position. And maybe a better fullback and a better defender. Because I think the three of them, of Euro, De Ligt and Martinez, are okay. But I do think they should have got maybe another centre-back in or another fullback in. I know they got Dorgu, who, again, I'm still on the fence, but I'm not really sure. But I don't really know if he's ready for the level that Rúben Amorim and Manchester United want. But I still look at guys like Dalot and I'm Luke Shaw. I'm just not really, pardon the pun, sure on both of them and if they fit into the system. I'm not that big a fan of either of them. But it will be interesting to see. Like, for example, when Mason Mount came in, I thought he was really good for Rúben Amorim in the first sort of 2-3 games he played. But unfortunately, like Mason Mount all the time, just gets injured. So, yeah, I think the system does work. And I think we've seen it work against Premier League teams. And I know it's sort of a small sample. But when he was at Sporting, he obviously beat Manchester City 4-1. He beat Arsenal, to be fair, on penalties. But he beat Tottenham. He's gone to big teams like Borussia Dortmund and won with that system. So I think the system does work. I just think you need the players to pull it off. And I just don't think Manchester United do. And I think it's difficult because Ineos have invested in this system and Rúben Amorim. So if you do sack the manager, it's like, okay, what happens to players like Dorgu, Cunha, Sesko, Mbeumo, and the centre backs like Yoro? What happens to them? But I really don't know. I think it works in the Premier League. I just think he might need a bit more quality, or if it's going to take too long. Because that's the thing. I think Rúben Amorim is, of course, a project manager. But if it's going to take too long and you're expecting results sooner rather than later, then get rid of him and bring someone else in. Bring someone else who's going to win now. If it's like, I don't know, a Xavi, a Conte. I see Gareth Southgate link. That's not going to work, I don't think. Or like Iraola, again, I think he's more of a long-term fit than a win now. But I think the system does work. I think I know you've had a lot of time, but I think a lot of new players have come in. I would say give it to the end of October, the second international break, or even December. And if it still shows no sign of improvements and he's not winning games, which is the most important thing, then yeah, fair enough. Get rid of it. Next question comes from, I believe, KT7161. And I quote, I read that Amorim was a TV pundit in Portugal. Are there any clips online? Because I can't find any, or any documentaries about his time in Portugal, even short ones or biographies. Have there been any of those fly on the wall type docs on Portuguese football? Any films or book anyone could recommend? Thanks. End quote. Cheap plug. I've done a few videos on Rúben Amorim. The playlist, of course, in the description. you can see the full timeline of Ruben Amorim's sort of managing history. You can see the second part of it as well, which I've put into a full video. If you like watching like 2-hour videos and stuff, that's there. Or isolated parts, so you can see that as well. But the playlist is in the description. But in terms of TV punditry, as far as I knew, I never saw him on anything. He did a few podcasts before becoming a manager. I think that's probably the closest you can get, and I'm sure you could find them. In terms of those on-the-wall docs, Portuguese football, they just don't happen. I think there's just too much drama going on. There's some clips, like, for example, for Sporting, they do a video every, I believe, game week called Backstage Sporting, and what they do is it's a little bit into the dressing room, a little bit on the fans, and then the game, and then you see sort of afterwards and before. That's probably as far and as close as we get to stuff like that. I just think it's just not something you see very often. I'm sure with, you know, TV deals coming through like Amazon Prime, Netflix and stuff like that, maybe there will be one in the future. I would assume if anyone's close to it, it'll probably be Porto, because they've had a complete rebuild, a new president. So maybe that's the case, or even with Benfica's presidential elections, that could come up. But yeah, nothing really as far as I'm aware. Feel free to correct me if any of you know any documentaries in Portuguese football. But yeah, hope that answers your question. The last question from now comes from @IR, and he says, quote, "Great content recently, mate." Thank you very much. "I had a question about Ruben Amorim. What's the significance of left-footed wing-backs in his system? When he first joined United, I noticed he used lefties on both sides. I was thinking that all his wing-backs at Sporting, Kenda, Jenny, Maxi Arujo and Nuno Santos, they're all left-footed. Now he primarily uses Dorgu and Ahmad there, and United haven't been linked with the right footers, which I think is why they were never in for Frimpong. I'm wondering what your take is on this." End quote. And I think that's a really good point and a really good question as well. So I will try to answer this as best I can. I'm not that good on the tactics side of things, but I'll try to answer sort of the best I can. So in his system, I would say the wing-backs aren't just wing-backs, they're more progressors of the ball. They create a lot of chances. They're not just wide runners, basically. They're the primary progressors. They provide width. They stretch the opposition and carry the ball into advanced areas, things like that. And then some of them even link inside most of the time. But that's because, I guess, the two midfielders, wherever it will be, Bruno and Ugarte, Casemiro, Bruno, whatever, they're more of the balance and circulation of the ball. And then the wing-backs carry that huge creative burden, because the midfielders aren't really going to do that. So at Sporting, it was Jenny and Nuno Santos who were getting the assist and the goals. And later on, it'll be Kenda, Maxi and Jenny. So yeah, they carry pretty much the huge creative burden. I think why Amorim prefers the left footers, I think it's mainly to do with like crossing angles. So I guess a natural left footer on either side can deliver out-swinging crosses with pace. And I think it's crucial when Ruben Amorim, for example, at Sporting, wanted to find his striker, whether it was Gyökeres or Paulinho or Slimani for a short while. And even now you've got like Sesko, Cunha and Højlund before running into the channels. So I think that probably helps United's creativity side of things at crossing angles. I think it's more on the touchline as well. Left footers usually open their body more easily in the middle of the pitch, whereas the right footer usually receive the ball with their back close to play, which slows down a bit of the circulation. But also, his system does thrive on wing backs driving in diagonally inside as well. Lefties on both sides naturally cut in with stronger control when pushing towards the centre, while still having the option of going down the line to cross as well. And the patterns we saw at Sporting, for example, Nuno Santos was effectively like a wide playmaker. Nuno Santos was tasked with, spraying switches, whipping early crosses, or combining inside. He's also not a bad striker with the ball, and he did get a few goals. When he first joined Sporting, he was a left winger under Ruben Amorim, but as Sporting signed guys like Pablo Sarabia, Trincao, Marcus Edwards, he would slowly sort of divert and go back into the left wing back role rather. So I do think it makes sense to have like a natural winger there, because they're just used to creating a lot more. The same with Jenny Katamo was, despite usually being trained as a right winger and playing as a right winger for Vitória Guimarães and Marítimo, this all gave him the same profile, someone who can operate on the outside, but still have that left-footed leaning angle as well. Jenny is a weird one because he takes on players very quickly and very smoothly, but he's also someone who is really frustrating to watch when it doesn't come on. Whereas Nuno Santos is similar, but I would also say I prefer someone like Nuno Santos to Maxi Arujo playing on the wing back, and I would trust them more to cross the ball and have the ball than I would someone like a Jenny Katamo or an Ivan Fresneda, someone like that. And I think we saw that is why he didn't play even Fresneda a lot at Sporting as well when he was there. A right footer on the wing would constantly be forced onto their weaker foot for line crosses, which kills sort of Amorim's direct wide style, I suppose. And at United, of course, Dorgu is naturally left-footed and Ahmad is more left dominant, even though not a wing-back by trade. They fit his pattern and Amorim values that. And I think we saw that with Diallo being his most improved player last year until he got injured. Diallo was fantastic Ahmad was fantastic rather in what Amorim was looking to build. And I think from that injury is where things started to go down for Ruben and Manchester United. But that's why you're not really used to seeing right backs who, are right-footed linked with United or Ruben Amorim. I think he just wants the sort of symmetry on the both sides on how they operate. And with left footers, keeping the tempo and width predictable in his system. Like I said, that's why guys like Fresneda wasn't really used in his time at Sporting. Even though he was bought in for like nearly 10 million euros or 8 million euros or something like that. He preferred using someone like Jenny or a Giovanni Kenda on that side and Nuno Santos and Maxi Ruja on the left. Or even Mateus Reis, who is naturally a centre-back by trade, but is still decent with the ball carrying. Not a great crosser, to be honest, but still decent at that level. But I hope that answers your question. So the question you're asking me, and I guess that you're waiting for me to answer, is do you think Rúben Amorim will turn it around? And in short, I unfortunately don't think so. I think the odds are too stacked up against him. When you start having guys like Wayne Rooney, Roy Keane, Gary Neville calling out your tactical acumen, especially, legends of the club, it's going to trickle down to the fans, and the fans have seen it on social media and stuff. And I think it's just maybe too much. I think he still deserves a bit more time. I would say maybe till October, like I've mentioned before. And then if the results aren't coming, then fair enough. But I think it'll be nearly a year, and you could sort of forgive it if you saw improvements in Manchester United from last year. And I think there's been, tiny bits like against Arsenal, but they still lost. Burnley, they scraped through. So I think if he's not continuing to improve, which I don't think he is, then in October you've got to look and be like, okay, we can give this project more time. Maybe give it till the end of the season when we're not in Europe or anything. But again, if United don't qualify for Europe, what are the circumstances that leads to afterwards? Do you see key players wanting to leave because they've not got Europe and players not wanting to join because they haven't got it? So I think there's a lot of things to think about. I love Rúben Amorim. I do. He turned my club around from what it was almost single-handedly. But at the same time, I'm not blind to what I'm seeing at United, and there hasn't been improvement. And it's very hard to defend Amorim. I always still say I'm one of Amorim's biggest supporters, but I think you've got to look at it realistically, and United aren't improving, and that is the main issue, and they're not winning games. If they were winning games, you could be like, okay, fair enough. Even if it was poor performances and they were winning games, you could be like, okay, the performance isn't great, but the most important thing is the 3 points. And I guess that is maybe an old school mentality, but it's true. 3 points the most important thing. I don't care if you play ugly, if you play sort of smash and grab. You look at Nuno Espirito Santo, they sort of sat defensively and counter-attacked at Nottingham Forest, and that's how they won games and got into Europe. So I don't really care how Rúben Amorim plays. If he's not getting the 3 points, then you need to maybe look elsewhere. But one thing I know, people are going to ask him to change the system. It's not going to happen. I promise you it's not going to happen. He will never do it. He's too stubborn, and maybe that's a fault. But Ineos knew this before they appointed him. So I don't think it's Amorim's fault for not changing. He would have said, I'm not changing my system. Or even if you watched him at Sporting, he's not going to change. He's going to keep it exactly the same. And he said it. If you want to get rid of him, then get rid of him. I think, Ineos have a decision to make over the coming months. And I know Jim Ratcliffe's a big fan of Rúben Amorim. But, as much as a bigger fan as I am as well, you can't argue with results. And unfortunately, they're not coming in for United. So yeah, that is the end of this video. Before I leave, I just want to do a small plug. Sorry for the amount of links in the description. I'll probably forget to put any in there. And I know what you're thinking. You said that you weren't buying FIFA again and that it was the worst game ever played. I did. But of course I'm a sucker. And that is, I guess, capitalism, commercialism, one of the two. So yeah, I've bought AFC again this year. Be doing another Road to Glory on my other channel. I'm going to keep this one specifically football and League of Portugal, Rúben Amorim related. But yeah, make sure you check that out if you want to see some EAFC content as well. Make sure you follow me on Twitter and make sure you look at the Rúben Amorim playlist. There's a lot in there, including these Q&As. But anyway, I'm Sam Fonseca. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time and peace.